Well, hello everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Um, you can see that Menti is up there for you to dial into, and many of you have, so join us at menti.com and use code 85617239. So do let us know where you're dialing in from. Would love to know. I'd love to know. And I must just say that whoever's coming in, dialing in from the dark side of the moon, you obviously knew that Pink Floyd was one of my favourite bands. I'm kind of that era. Anyway, Abdul, are we good to go?
Yeah, we are ready. So, hello everyone. A very warm welcome and good evening to all of you in our today's webinar hosted by APM Southeast Branch. I am Abdul, your host for today's webinar. So, today webinar title is Asset Navigating Difficult Conversations on Project, and our speaker will be Marian. So, everyone in the project management community space in the APM knows Marian and admire her work. Me personally and my branch, Southeast branch, we really appreciate and admire her work. I still remember when 2-3 months back I met Marian when we hosted her in Kent for our face-to-face session. I said to her, Marian, your knowledge and experience, so I want that everyone in the world, in the project management community space from all over the world should learn from you. So we will host you for a webinar, and I'm happy and glad today is the day. So I would like all of you to engage in this session, and it's about how project leaders, project managers can navigate and can learn the art of navigating difficult conversations in project. And there's so much you can learn from Marian as well. You can follow her on LinkedIn where she shares tons of knowledgeable stuff. I'm a big LinkedIn follower of Marian and her work because she has more than 30 years of experience. So you can learn a lot, and you can also join our APM Southeast branch LinkedIn group as well. So I just wanted to add some little more stuff that this will be a 1 hour session, and you won't be able to ask question by speaking, so you need to write. So you will be writing the question during the session or at the end, how you like it, and I will discuss all the questions at the end with the Marian as well. And if you miss the session because of any issue, then it will be available on APM YouTube channel. You can watch it later. You can subscribe to the channel as well. And the slides of Marian presentation will be available on APM Southeast Branch community page on APM website as well. So this session points will also be added on your CBD as well on APM website if you are APM member. If not, you can be a member by just sign up with the details. So thank you so much, and over to you, Marian.
Wow, Abdul, what an introduction. That was fabulous. Thank you so much. And it's a huge pleasure to be here. The APM is the most fantastic membership body. There are some fantastic branches, and it was a great pleasure to meet the Southeast branch earlier this year. So as you can see, we are using menti.com, which means that at various points during this evening, you are going to be asked questions. And I just want to warn you now, so you're prepared and you're thinking about it, that the last question I'm going to ask you is, what are you taking away from this session tonight? So for those of you who are sitting there, maybe sort of leaning back a bit, munching your supper and half listening, you are going to get and ask that question. What are you going to take away from the session at the end of this presentation? So do just keep focused and think what you're going to take away from this. And it's great. One of the great things about webinars, of course, is that we can be spread in terms of our connection. Obviously, people from all over the world have dialed into this, and not just the Southeast branch. So it's really lovely to have you here tonight. And please make sure you go on the APM website and that you look at all the other events that are open to you. And please, by all means, do connect with me on LinkedIn. So thank you for your responses as to where you're coming from. These slides will be made available to you afterwards. So let's move on. And as by way of a bit of an introduction to me, so who am I? Well, Do you know, I'm one of these people who became an accidental project manager. So having done my degree in zoology, applied zoology, I spent 16 years in what I call a proper job, which is probably the wrong way of describing it. However, I used to work for a company called ICI, and we became Zeneca, and many people know of the company AstraZeneca that became into. And during that time, I was working in all sorts of different roles and gradually got more and more involved in doing project management and project work. And then after that 16 years, I then went freelancing as a sort of contract project manager for over 30 years in multiple industries and sectors. And you can see some of the places I've worked in the past. And what I love about project management is that it's very, very much a transferable skill. So I was able to move between lots of different industries and sectors, as long as I made sure I had some good technical support around me, some good subject matter experts. But in parallel with this, I decided to train as and qualified as a coach. I also invested in my leadership training. So I spent 10 months on a leadership program, which was fabulous. In 2019, I took my chartered project professional and achieved the standards. So I'm very proud to be a CHPP. And also I'm a fellow of the APM too. So as you can see, I'm very invested in project management. I always joke that if you cut my arm off in half, like a stick of rock, like you'd see at the seaside, the words project manager will flow through. However, as a contractor, I find myself going into different organisations and often returning to some of them as time went on and new programs were started or new projects were started. And I found myself getting quite frustrated about seeing poor leadership on projects. So I decided to do something about it. So what I do now is I no longer do hands-on project management work, but I train people, project people, in leadership and people skills. I have a framework here, the 5 T's framework. You probably, if you go on my website, it tells you a bit more about it. I do a bit of work in terms of some very bespoke training for organisations, and I'm also really proud that I'm able to support and mentor people going for their chartership application, so through the written stages and so forth. So I founded Extraordinary PM in 2016 and have been focusing on leadership and people skills ever since. And that's why I get into having conversations about, well, how do we manage difficult conversations on projects? So just out of interest, who do you mostly find that you need to have brave conversations with or difficult conversations with? So you've got some options there that you can vote. So please do pick up your phones. Yes, sponsor, the board. They're often customers, yes. So there's a whole range here of different people that you might need to have from time to time those difficult conversations with. So just, if you're voting, that's great, and if you're not voting, just have a reflection for a moment on who do you have those conversations with and what sort of conversations are they, and just take a minute to think about, well, why do you see them as difficult conversations? What's awkward about them? Is it that you're delivering bad news? Is it that you feel that you're in a conflict situation? Is that conflict of your making or of someone else's making? What is it that's causing you to feel that the conversation is going to be difficult? And actually, are you telling yourself a story? Is it actually going to become difficult, or is this just what you're experiencing? Or are you looking back to previous situations and extrapolating forward in a way that might be accurate or not accurate for that matter? So it's not surprising that as project people, we end up having challenging conversations because projects are difficult things to execute. And let's face it, I've never yet met a project manager who has enough resources and enough time to do the scope that they're being asked to deliver. So sometimes this results in us having difficult conversations. Now I can see there's a couple of question marks there. If those are going to be questions, by all means, please type them into the questions tab, and then Abdul can ask me them at the end. So what is it that makes a conversation difficult? Well, quite often it's because our uncertainty we are feeling some uncertainty regarding the outcome. We're not sure what's going to happen, you know, as an outcome from this conversation that we're navigating. We are often fearful or unpredictable, we're also often uncertain about the other person's response. They may be unpredictable from our perspective in terms of how they're going to respond to the situation that we're confronting them about or discussing with them about. And of course, there's that fear, that natural fear that we might get hurt in the process. And there's also the other fear, of course, that we might upset someone else. We might trample on their feelings or trample on their values in some way. So that this can be a difficult, awkward process that we're about to embark on. And you can see that you'll see that in my presentation, I use lots of photos that might make us think or remind us of a situation. And I love this little one here where actually we've got a huge amount of uncertainty and worry between the person balancing on the tightrope and the person holding that string taut. There's all that risk that goes with these difficult conversations that we may be fearful of. So why do we encounter difficult conversations? Well, as I said, projects can be tough things to navigate. We often don't have enough resources. We're being asked to do too much in too short of time. This leads often to some tensions and some challenges that we need to navigate. We may be breaking new ground. We may be in a very innovative environment. We may have very strong views from different technical experts and disagreements. So as we break new ground, conflicts can arise. And in some cases, we want to create a degree of conflict because that can often drive the debate, that can drive the innovation. But we need to manage that in a safe space and in a way where we've if you like, we've contracted with our colleagues that we can have those types of difficult conversations. And of course, there's that natural thing that as high-performing teams, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the forming, norming, storming, performing, and mourning development of high-performing teams. It's Tuckman model. You're probably well aware that to get to high performance requires us to storm. And that can mean that we do need to have these challenging conversations that allow us to understand where others are coming from and also make sure that we know where we're coming from and that we feel we can state our perspectives and our insights. So projects are tough places. Project management can indeed be a bit of a tough gig. So why do we feel we need to be brave? And I always remember this sort of this picture here of back in the day when we had the royalists and the parliamentarians, of the small royalist boy child being asked when he last saw his father. And I can imagine what the fear that small person had going in front of these quite stern-looking characters. This always makes me feel like I'm going to a project board and going to have to tell some difficult news. So what stories are we telling ourselves about the situation? And let's check whether what we're saying is actually a good, strong reflection of what we are telling ourselves. So are we, before we even going into the conversation, telling ourselves that it's going to be tricky, that someone's going to get angry with us, someone might get upset with us? What is it that we might be fearing? Might we be fearing an attack? Might we be fearing that we're going to feel hurt in the process, or as I said earlier, hurt by others? So what do we think we know about the situation? So when we're anticipating this conversation, let's make sure we're looking at it eyes wide open and that we're actually being rational about the situation. We're looking at it objectively and factually, not just based on maybe the emotions that we might find bubbling up. And what do we think we know about the other person and their perspective? Because quite often as human beings, we actually make up stories in our head to make sense of the world around us. We're very good at filling in all of those jigsaw puzzles to try and make some certainty of this very confusing world that we live in. So we often make up stories in our heads. We often create thoughts about another situation, and our fears can drive us to doing that into a place where we might not be as objective as we could be. So when you're anticipating a difficult conversation, think about, are you being objective? Are you looking at the facts? What do you really know about the situation? And if you need to find out more and ask others' perspectives, then by all means do so. So what could we be telling ourselves instead of just fearing this conversation? Well, one of the things that I always recommend is we think about what's at stake here. What is the conversation that we really need to have? Why is it important? Is it my ego that's getting in the way and causing me to hold back and not to say and confront what I need to confront? So what's so really important here? I love Simon Sinek. Those of you who know me will talk, I talk about Simon Sinek's Big Why. And I often think that the wisdom in thinking about the why of what we're trying to achieve is really important. So if we take time to engage with, why does this conversation matter? For the sake of what makes this conversation really important? And when we get down to the essence of that, then it can help us stand really strong and feel like, as this little fire chief here is doing, that we can have those challenging conversations with people that may be more senior than us, that people that we may hold in awe, or that we may fear in some way. So if we can work out what's really at stake here and make that bigger than us and our fears and our ego, then it's going to be more easy to navigate that conversation and do so in an objective way. And let's think about this. If we don't speak up about a situation, we're doing the other person a disservice. So if, for example, we want to give some difficult feedback, then we're doing a disservice if we don't do that. If we think we've got some bad news about our project that our sponsor needs to know and we're holding back, then we're doing a disservice to our sponsor because we're not keeping them fully informed of what they need to know. And actually, if we're not speaking up, we're doing ourselves a disservice. So we don't want to leave things festering and for us worrying about that. We need to be able to think about, what is the big why here? Why is it important? And in what way can we move a situation forward in service of not just ourselves, but other people involved in that situation? So, as I said, I'm a fan of Simon Sinek, and this is a diagram from his book, which is called Start With Why. And as he says, in business, it doesn't matter what you do, it matters why you do it. So one of the essences of dealing with these difficult conversations is to find that big why. So why does this conversation matter? For the sake of what? And what will it then enable us to do? And we can actually think through for ourselves, I will have this conversation so that, and we can fill in those dots there. I will have this conversation with my sponsor to explain that we need to navigate our timeline to increase another 4 weeks on the project timeline so that we can deliver the outcomes with the quality that we need to. Or we can deliver the project within the health and safety constraints that we need to. Or I'll have this conversation with someone else in my team who I'm finding it really difficult to work with, for the sake of trying to establish some collaboration, some connection, some harmony that can enable us to work more productively together for the sake of this project, which is bigger than the egos of the both of us. So going in and having a difficult conversation is helped by you understanding your why. But another thing that can really help you is to think about your values. Now, as human beings, we all have values that we acquire. In fact, we can choose our values. So our values are often influenced by our experiences, maybe how we've been brought up and such like. But as adults, we can get to choose our values. So what do you stand for? What are your guiding principles? And how could you bring them into play in this conversation. Because if you're standing strong in your values, and you know your values might be maybe let's say maybe there's a value of fairness here, or you might have values of collaboration, or you might have values of harmony, or you might have values of truth and uncovering truth, or whatever they might be. Think about what those values are that you are holding that can help you stand strong in that conversation, and make sure you hold that conversation in an effective and a collaborative way in order for the outcome that you are trying to achieve. So let me ask you a question. So another question slide coming up. If you're thinking about a difficult conversation, what values might you think about bringing into play? So I'm really curious about those of you on this call. And if you've joined late, you can see at the top of the slide there, you can go on to menti.com, and the code that's there will connect you to this this call and enable you to respond to this question. So I know that some of you definitely are, but I know that there are more that still could join, and feedback. And the way these words clouds work, as I'm sure you're aware, is the larger the font, the more responses there are on that. So you can see that honesty, empathy, fairness are playing large here, and integrity. And there's some great values in there that that are really, really important to use when we're thinking about navigating our difficult conversations. And I would counsel you afterwards to think about going and finding this presentation and downloading this slide to remind you of those things that can be really important from this group that's on this call now, because we're coming up with some great things here. Things that you can bear in mind when you're anticipating that difficult conversation and you're thinking about how you want to navigate that conversation. So not just what you're doing, but how you want to navigate it, and the values that you're bringing into play here. So thank you everyone for your responses here. I'm not sure how many times you can respond to this question. I should have checked that. So apologies if there aren't enough for all the values you want to add. But as you can all see, there's some really good values in here, and important things like patience, respect, transparency, seeking to understand. And it's really important to think about understanding where the other person is coming from without making assumptions. Assumptions are the things that can really cause us to act in peculiar ways. And I'm just going to take a minute just to talk about assumptions while this is just finishing off its word clouding. So assumptions are, as you know, stories that we make up ourselves about things where we haven't got the facts. So we assume something to fill in those gaps and to help us make that picture of certainty of the world that we live in. Now, one of the things that's interesting about assumptions is that most of the time, the assumptions that we make about a situation, about ourselves, about another person, are a reflection of our fears. So this is something that I learned on that leadership program I mentioned, is that often our assumptions are just a reflection of our fears, our thoughts, and our perspectives. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is to understand where the other person's coming from with good curiosity, good listening skills, really seeking to understand and not to make assumptions about them, because your assumptions are likely to be more of a reflection of your fears and where you're coming from. So thank you for all of you who've added in their values here. There's some fantastic group of really important values to think about when we're thinking about the difficult conversations that we might be about to navigate. So I'm going to move on. We've got some steps to go through that I'm going to share with you in terms of planning for our difficult conversations. So first off, step one is to prepare. Now, On this slide, we talk about timeliness. So one of the things we need to do is not put off this difficult conversation. It needs to be relatively current. If you came to me and tried to talk to me about something that had happened 3 months ago, I would really struggle to recall in enough detail exactly what it was we were talking about. So don't leave something festering. Make sure you approach it from a timely perspective, but you do need to prepare for the conversation. You need to think about your purpose and your big why, and what your intended outcomes are, and what your intention for this conversation might be. So let's think about, or maybe positioning, having a good intention where we might find greater collaboration, or we might find greater mutual understanding one and another. Think about making sure that you are going to be really clear, because what we don't want is muddle and confusion in a muddy situation. We need to be clear about the situation we're going to talk about. And really, really importantly, we need to come from a place where we are respecting the other person. So the art of preparation, but in a timely fashion, is really important for step 1. Now we go on to step 2. Now, quick question for you. I told you that I use meaningful pictures here, and I would love to know from you, before I go any further, just look at this picture. So this is for my own benefit, this question. This isn't for any other reason, that I'm just curious about everyone who's on the call. So my question to you is, who recognises this photo? So no idea, yes, definitely, or possibly. And the reason I'm asking this is when I chose to use this photo, the only person I surveyed was my 32-year-old daughter, and she was yes, definitely. And what I can't work out is whether or not this is the wrong photo to use. And you can see I'm getting some feedback here that this is quite a polarized response. So thank you for those people who do recognize it. And for those people who have no idea, then I sincerely apologize. And I will explain where it comes from. So I'm just going to move on quickly. So this is from a sketch by the infamous Monty Python comedians from back in the 70s, 80s, whatever. And this is their Spanish Inquisition sketch. And they used to suddenly romp in, cutting in a sketch saying, "No one expected the Spanish Inquisition." So for those of you who recognize this means something. For those of you who don't, I'm sorry I had to explain it. So what we don't want to do is spring a surprise on the person we're having that difficult conversation with. What we want to do is, once we've planned that conversation, is then to set the permissions for the person set the permissions with the person that we want to have the conversation with. So we want to pay them the courtesy of finding out where and when works best for that conversation to happen. And we need to be clear about the topic in the process. So we're broaching the subject that we want to have a conversation. We're not suddenly just springing on them like the Spanish Inquisition and interrogating them, but we're setting the conversation up, hopefully for success. So here's an example, and this there are many different difficult conversations I'm sure you're all thinking about. This may not be appropriate example for the one you're thinking about, but it's an example. So I need to have a conversation with you about your contribution to last week's meeting. When would be a good time and place to speak about it? So we're just talking and setting things up. We're wanting to make sure that it's a recent thing that we're talking about, and we're wanting to make sure that we have the opportunity to have a conversation with this person, hopefully fairly soon, because we don't want things lagging onwards. Okay, so there's another meaningful photo, and we're project managers, aren't we? And I didn't ask a question about this one, but I don't know how many of you know or familiar with the watermelon effect. So this is a lovely carved watermelon. And I often talk about watermelon effect when I'm talking about ethics in project management. And it's that thing when sometimes, and I've been in a situation where a sponsor has pushed me very hard to report my projects green, when actually if you cut it, it's red on the inside. So This is, for me, this is a metaphor, this picture of stating the facts in a clear way, in an open way. So if we're on a red situation, let's say it's red. If we're on an amber, let's say it's amber. If we're on a green situation, green. So I imagine all of us are familiar with RAG statuses. So that watermelon is to remind us of the watermelon effect of maybe sometimes misreporting our projects if we're not careful. And can I just add that when I was pushed by my sponsor to misreport my project, I absolutely didn't, just to be crystal clear about that. So when we're talking about we're beginning to have that difficult conversation, we need to be really clear and specific. And we're talking about facts. We're not talking about emotions. We're talking about objective facts of a situation or what happened or what have you. We want to clarify and see that the person sees the facts in the same way as us, or in a similar way. And if they don't, we need to get inquisitive. So what is it they see? What do they understand? What they see from their perspective? So we might say, for example, yesterday in that meeting, I heard you say whatever it would have been when we were discussing whatever the subject would have been. So make sure we're thinking and focusing on being factual and objective. And then we can talk about the impact of those facts, the impact on you, on your relationship and the situation. And you can be clear and specific. You need to be clear and specific. So we're depersonalizing it in terms of, this is what happened and this is how it made me feel. You're owning the impact on you. You're not saying, this is what happened and you made me feel this and you did this to me and that happened and I felt like this. We're saying what happened objectively, and then you can talk about how it made you feel, but you're not telling the other person that they did that to you. So here's an example. When you said that, I felt confused and angry as I could not see the relevance at that point. I felt let down and lost some trust in your judgment. The meeting ended without us resolving the issue, and this delayed the project by a week. So it's quite tough discussion, but it's being objective and it's talking about how it made you feel, not how the other person was actually actively making you feel. So we're stating the impact of the facts that hopefully you've already both agreed on. Then we get into the listening and the hearing. So we really need to make sure that we are giving the space and taking the time to let the other person explain their perspective, and that we're listening carefully to that. We're really hearing what they're saying. We're not rebutting what they're saying straight away or anything like that. We are listening carefully, making sure we're understanding, and let's play back our understanding of what they said to make sure we really are hearing and we really are clear. And then at this point, you can explore the impact of where that takes you both. So how can that take you forward? Well, how can you move forward from this situation? So you're listening and hearing really carefully. And then that enables you on step 6 to think about building, how you would build, and discuss about how you might build a new way forward. So it could be a change in behavior. It could be agreement about how you're going to work together going forward. It could be learning from the situation and thinking about what you'll do differently next time. What you're really wanting to do is to be open and flexible in this situation and agree how you can move forward from that position as a result of that difficult conversation. And then once you've done this and you've worked your way forward, you actually need to follow up, because you've braved having that difficult conversation. You've got over the situation through that conversation to move forwards, but you want to follow up to strengthen your relationship. You want to review how things are going for both of you. You want to think about how do you feed back to one another collaboratively and supportively. So you need to think about the situation and the person concerned and look at how you can support them going forwards. I once had a conversation, a really difficult conversation, with someone who I felt was, this is early on in my career, was constantly undermining me, and making me feel quite small. And when we had that conversation, it was really difficult for him. He didn't intend for that to happen. He was quite shocked. And what was really important then was having had that discussion, understood what he did and where he was coming from, and me and where I was coming from, we could agree a way forward of working really effectively together. But what we needed to do was nurture that different way of working. So following up, checking how things are going, checking in with one another, and being there for one another and supporting one another made a massive difference. And I have to say that some of the most difficult conversations I've had have turned into some of the best and most fruitful relationships I've had in the workplace. So I want to share just here something that can also help you. And I always ask who's familiar with the Johari window. And for anyone who was in the Southeast branch event that I attended a few months ago, anyone from the Southeast branch needs to answer yes to this question, because we did talk about the Johari window. And I often find when I ask this question of project managers, this is the response I get, this type of pattern of response. So there's a lot of people who may not be familiar with it. So I often think that project managers, for whatever reasons, have not entirely had the benefit of all of the management tools some of our purely management colleagues get exposed to. So I want to share the Johari window. And the reason for doing this is it can help us understand and think about how we look at our relationships with other people. And I'm just going to do it very simply. I'm not going to do a great big slide build on it. So the Johari window was something that was made up, if you like, by two guys called Joe and Harry, and they called it the Johari window to make it sound a bit posh. I always think that's quite hilarious. So Joe and Harry came up with this. And if we look at the diagram on the right hand side, our everything's a 2x2 matrix, isn't it? Our 2x2 matrix, we can see that if I'm looking along the top line there, and you are looking up vertically up the right hand side of this, you can see there's an area that we clearly can both see. Things are both known to one another. But there's going to be things that I know about, or I can see, that you don't know about, and there's going to be things that you can see that I don't know about. So for example, right now, Abdul is collecting and looking at all of the questions that people are asking. I can't see those questions yet, thankfully, but so there's always going to be things that one of us can see that the other can't see. And of course, we're going to have that bit bottom left-hand corner, the blind spot there, things that neither of us can see. So we only ever have our perspective on the situation, but it helps if we can get the perspective of another. So ideally what we want to do is make that top right-hand box as large as is humanly possible, because the more we collectively know about a situation or about a project or about a challenge or a problem, whatever it might be, the more we both know about it, the more we can be most effective in working with it. So if we imagine that the vertical and the horizontal lines in that box are almost like cross wires, what we ideally want to do is move let me get this right, move the vertical line to the left and the horizontal line down lower. So the vertical to the left and the horizontal to lower, which will mean that the box at the top right hand corner is enlarged. So the more we can do to move those cross wires and enlarge in that top right box, the better. So how do we do that? Well, we do it by discussion. We do it by getting curious about one another and what we can each see. We use our communication skills to expand that box. And in effect, when we're having our difficult conversations, we are trying to do that. We're trying to understand collectively what we can see so we can try and reach some form of agreement and some form of collective perspective on the situation that we're talking about. So I always think this is a good tool to have in your kit bag when you're thinking about a difficult conversation. Think about that there will be things that you can't see that the other can, and go in with an intention of widening what you can both see so you can actually put it on the table and do something about it. There's a saying, and forgive me for those of you who know me well, you will know I talk about this a lot. There's a saying that I believe is a Canadian saying called, let's get the dead moose out from underneath the table. So with apologies to people who love moose, this does involve a dead moose. And the thing is, you come into the room and everyone knows that there's something that doesn't smell quite right. And guess what? Underneath the table is hidden this moose that has died. And as a project team, you need to get that dead moose out, put it on top of the table, and then you can all collectively walk around the table and figure out what happened to the moose and what are you going to do with it. So it's a bit of a sort of a Canadian thing, saying. But there's a huge power in us putting on the table in front of us what we think is a problem, and us literally walking around that table looking from different perspectives at how to solve that problem. And there's a real power in collectively standing in different positions and saying, what perspective are we in here? Let's look at it from the perspective of the customer. Now let's move. Let's look at this problem from the perspective of maybe some of our suppliers, or let's look at this another perspective, another place. Let's look at it at the perspective from our sponsor. So the Johari window can be really helpful in you thinking about how you might approach a situation where you're going to have a difficult conversation. Then the other thing I want to share with you is box breathing. Oh, what's she going on about here, I hear you ask? Who uses, oh yes, someone uses box breathing, great. Box what? Or yes, or there's a box where you can tick that says I prefer not to incriminate myself. So thank you for whoever just voted for that. Took me ages to think of all these options and answers. So box what? So I think what I should do is carry on and explain box breathing. So this is where you all have to do some work. And unfortunately, I can't see your pictures or your cameras or you, and you can see me. However, so I'm not going to know if you're doing this, but I'm going to totally trust you. So what I want you to do is hold your finger up. Is everyone doing this? Hello? Hello, hello, everyone there? Hold your finger up. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to slow down our brains and make ourselves think, okay? So here we go. And you have to hold your finger up, and your finger is going to draw the shape of a box like that. Really simple. You don't have to be Van Gogh. So we're going to breathe in for 3. 1, 2, 3. Hold for 3, 2, 3. Breathe out for 3, 2, 3. Hold for 3. Then we're going to do it again. We're going to breathe in for 3. We're going to hold for 3. Don't die in the process. Keep breathing. Breathe out for 3. And we're going to hold for 3. Now just notice how you are. And I don't know for you, but I'm much calmer than I was 3 minutes ago. So the idea of box breathing is that it slows your brain down, and actually it stops and subdues to a degree the adrenaline that we have flowing around us when we're in a difficult conversation, and it helps us get out of our limbic brain situation. So you will probably recall that our limbic brain is where we have our fight or our flight or our freeze thinking. And when we're in our difficult conversations, we want to be not in that situation. We want to use our cortex, our outer layers of our brain, to think and process appropriately. So using box breathing is a really good a really good tool for slowing down what's going on in a difficult situation. And you think, well, how does she know this? Well, apparently I was told that the US Navy SEALs use this technique of box breathing when they're in a combat situation. Now, I'm sure they don't hold their fingers up and draw boxes, so we need to think about doing this in our heads, obviously, but it's a really powerful way of slowing down things for us in a difficult situation. So it's not just for difficult conversations. We might use it if we're going to do a presentation and a webinar, for example. We might use it before we go into a board meeting. We might use it before we jump off the top diving board into a swimming pool. There are very many ways in which you can use it, but remember the box breathing and drawing your finger round, and then just move your finger in the head, because otherwise if you start doing this in your project meetings, everyone's going to think you're quite weird, and that's probably not the best look. So box breathing is very helpful. And something else I just want to leave you with before we go into questions is something that I think is really helpful here. And there's a great book called The 4 Agreements, written by Don Miguel Ruiz. And these, I think, apply to difficult conversations. So number 1, be impeccable with your words. So you're speaking with integrity. You're saying what you mean. There's our tongue is a great tool, a powerful sword. I've heard people talk, there's poems about that, there are songs about it. Speak with integrity and say what you mean, only what you mean. Don't take things personally. So quite often, what gets in the way of difficult conversations is us taking things personally. Nothing others do is because of you. What others do and say on us is a projection of their own reality. So people are not doing things because of you. Do not think that it's about you. And my thing about assumptions, don't make assumptions. So find the courage to ask the questions and be curious and express as well what you really want, but do it clearly and objectively. So communication will help us avoid misunderstandings. And of course, finally, always do your best. Under any circumstance, simply do your best. And then you're going to avoid that, oh, I should have done this or should have done that. It avoids that self-judgment. So I think the 4 Agreements are a great resource, and you can find book summaries online about this, of the book. This is very much a very high level summary. So I think this is a good thing to take with us when we're anticipating a difficult conversation, and a good mantra to work by. So at this point, we do 2 things. We ask if there are any questions, and I've also put a QR code up there. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you'll find me on LinkedIn. By all means, scan that QR code, and I will be more than happy to connect with you. And in a moment or two, I will go on to the final slide, which is the one that asks you what you're going to take away from this seminar. So you might be wanting to think about, what are you going to take from this? What could you put into practice tomorrow? You might not be anticipating a difficult conversation tomorrow, but even if you're thinking of some of the pointers or some of the things that we've talked about, what will you put into practice tomorrow? And what are you going to take away that you're going to think about for next week or the week after? So just be prepared. We're going to come up with that slide in just a moment, but we're going to have some questions first.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marian. So we have a lot of questions. Hopefully we will try to answer them. If some question miss, so we do a follow-up, and then people can see their answers on website as well. So one question. So what's one of the most difficult conversation you had in the workplace, and what was the outcome?
Well, that's a really good question. So the most difficult conversation I had was when I was working in a smallish government department who had been developing an in-house IT system, and they'd invested in this system for 5 years. And this system was very much scanning lots and lots of different documents. So lots of analysis could be done on the documents. But the system had a design fault, which meant that a fundamental design fault, which meant that before these documents were scanned, they forgot to note that a paperclip or a staple had been taken out from them. So it resulted in all these pages and pages and pages being scanned, but nobody could associate one page with another. So basically, I had to go to the director of that government department and explain that the 5 years worth of investment was all for nothing, because actually we could not we could not get this system over the line. So I'd been brought in to try and get that IT system finally up and running, because it had been struggling for so long. And I was dreading this because I knew that it would likely to be quite career limiting to him and to one of his colleagues, who was the sort of the architect behind the whole thing. And so I had to explain this, and I was able to go in and explain how we could implement an alternative system that could be done and managed in the right way. But I was very concerned with how that conversation would go, because I was giving him the most extremely bad, news that he could have anticipated. And I made sure that during the course of working there early on, I treated him like a stakeholder. I treated him with respect. I made sure that he knew that we were going to have a conversation on progress, and that I may be imparting some bad news. And so I just set the conversation up, and he was very calm and very measured. It didn't go anything like as badly as I thought it would go, but it was the bad news of the 5 years worth of investment that was wasted as the most difficult. And actually, as a result, some of the people actually managed to go on and they went into different roles, and their careers flourished, and nothing was as bad as we all thought it was going to be.
Yeah. So there's a question from Terry that what do you do if a person does not engage in a difficult conversation?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to try and figure out why they're not engaging. So obviously, if you've thought about your big why for why the conversation matters, then you've got to try and align and think about whether they've got a different agenda, or whether they are why it is that they're not engaging. It could be they are fearful of that conversation. It could be that there's maybe some interpersonal challenges, or it may be they just simply refuse to come to the meetings. And I think if you need to try and just open that Johari window, if you like, and understand more about where are they coming from and what's the challenge, and then to try and establish what's sitting behind their reluctance to have that difficult conversation, and see how you can work with that information to encourage and engage them. And if they're fearful of how that conversation is going to go, then just try and reassure them that you're trying to establish whatever it is, the purpose you're trying to have the conversation for, is that it's for the benefit of you mutually, or it's for the benefit of a good outcome, ultimately for you both.
Yeah, reassurance and trust. Developing trust with people. Yeah. So there's a very interesting question from Ashok that in the past, when we have spoken up and did the right things, for example, told the truth about the project, it is the messenger that gets shot, not the perpetrators. How do we avoid?
Yeah, that's always a difficult one, is it? There is that don't shoot the messenger, and it's almost like I think it's knowing that, or setting up the discussion that says, I'm bringing some information here for you, because I need to get your perspective or your view on it, and we need to agree what we're going to do with that. However, I do need you to understand that I'm reflecting the situation on behalf of the project team and where we are, and therefore I'm trying to do so in a way that's objective and for the benefit of us moving forward. And you may find that, unfortunately, that some people get quite anxious and angry with you, but if you can think about how you want to set up that conversation, and you remain calm and you remain seated in your values and the big why of you having that conversation, then you need to make sure that you are navigating that in a way that you are being appropriately assertive, if you like, and I don't mean aggressive, I definitely mean assertive with the person that is trying to shoot you, not in terms of shooting the messenger, and make sure that they are understanding why it's important to have the conversation, why it's important for them to hear what you're saying, and yeah, just to stand your ground as best as you can, and make sure you're working from a basis of facts, and actually, if necessary, take some colleagues with you, and make sure you're relying on the facts. Have some subject matter experts there as well to back you up.
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions, so I will ask few of them, and we need to cope up with the time as well. So one question from John: how would you suggest to best deal with intellectual intimidation in a conversation?
Okay, so intellectual intimidation. Yeah, I'm assuming that's where somebody is purporting to be the technical expert, and that you're not, and therefore they're right and you're wrong. So I always, first of all, let's think about respecting. So let's respect them and acknowledge their intellectual capabilities, their knowledge, their expertise. I often ask them to explain to me exactly where they're coming from and why what's their position intellectually. If I feel that they are trying to browbeat me in some way, I often will say, well, I'm here to be the project manager. My expertise is in how to run a project. You may have some expertise in how this particular widget works that we're trying to implement. However, let's see where we can find a ground where we can both meet, where we can both bring our expertise into play. And often understand that if somebody's coming at you from a position of intellectual superiority, that is probably because they're coming from a position of fear. So if somebody's using something like, as I say, intellectual superiority, if you like, then try and figure out why they're coming from that position and where they're coming from. And then maybe think about, well, how can you help them and engage them and give them that sort of hand towards you having that the conversation you need to have, so that that they feel less fearful of the conversation. So I say often, as I say, I think often people can use their position of power, maybe their position of intellectual superiority, or actually, let's say, greater knowledge, to try and browbeat you, because that's probably because they're coming from a place of fear. So let's get behind that and understand how we can make them feel less fearful. Sorry, it's a rather long-winded explanation, but hopefully that is like, let's get behind them, let's empathize, understand where they're coming from. Also, talk to your colleagues or their colleagues to understand how better to connect with them.
Yeah. So there's some multiple questions, but we'll take a last question.
Yeah.
So do you have any, so it's a question from Alice. Do you have any tips or advice how to handle situation if we are on the other side of these type of conversations?
When someone is trying to have a difficult conversation with you? Well, first of all, just empathize with them. So just think about, where are they coming from? What's important for them? Make sure that hopefully if somebody's doing the Spanish Inquisition on you, as I describe it, they're suddenly pouncing on you and asking you difficult things or demanding difficult things, you can say, I'm happy to have this conversation with you, but not now. I would like us to agree when we're going to have that conversation. That then gives you a little bit of time to think about where they might be coming from and how you want to navigate and respond that conversation. So ask for time and agree when you're going to speak to them. Don't just get caught on the back foot. So you can then think things through and plan them. Make sure that you are using all the tips that we talked about tonight, which is you know, so then you can plan, then you can think about a situation and try and understand what the facts might be. Think about your values, connect with your values, connect with what's really important for you. Do that box breathing and stand strong during that conversation. Think about the outcome you want. Very much think about the outcomes you want.
Sure. Yeah, so yeah, it's already 6:30. So we will try to keep up with the questions on the APM website. If Marian, if you have time and you can answer some of the questions there.
So what we're going to do is I will be sent all the questions. I will answer them. If any of you want to ask specific questions that you haven't put in the webinar box here, then you can always message me on LinkedIn. Always happy to respond to any questions. It's one of the things that's difficult about difficult conversations is we often need to get into the specifics for me to be able to answer the questions really well. And without knowing your specifics and your context and your background, it's difficult for me to sort of say how I would advise going about things. So thank you for asking the questions, but knowing that we're quite generalized in how we can deal with them. I can see that we've got some responses on here for what people are taking away. So there's lots of it's not personal box breathing and Johari, great. The moose expression, that's a really, really good one. Please, when you're thinking about looking at a problem situation, do that thing of looking at it from a perspective and physically moving. There's something in the brain that unlocks the brain. So we've got some great takeaways. So please, please, please do put some of this stuff, all of it, into practice as soon as possible. I'd like, you know, message me on LinkedIn about what you're doing tomorrow. I want to know what you're going to take away and do tomorrow. So I suppose we should thank everyone for showing up tonight. Thank you for being with us. Abdul, thank you for chairing, and thank you to the Southeast.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a pleasure to host you, my end and from our branch end. And thank you everyone for joining us today. These slides will be available on APM website, so you can see it later. In the 5 working days, they will be available. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone. Have a good evening.